Imagine for a second an entire nation that has completely sealed itself off from the rest of the planet. We're talking almost zero contact with the outside world for over 200 years. No one comes in, no one goes out. Now imagine an unstoppable, technologically advanced force suddenly showing up right on their doorstep. How does a totally isolated world react to that? And exactly what kind of person does it take to lead that kind of aggressive, world-changing mission? Today, we are diving deep into the incredible story of Commodore Matthew Perry and the dramatic opening of Japan. Section 1. The Roar of Iron. Let's set the scene. It's the spring of 1853. A fleet of giant, ominous warships drops anchor in Edo Bay, which is what we call Tokyo Bay today. And I want you to really picture the stark sensory contrast here. On the shoreline, you have Japanese officials dressed in these immaculate, traditional silk ceremonial robes, standing in absolute stunned silence. And out on the water, thick black smoke is just billowing from soot-darkened funnels. The deep, heavy thrumming of steam engines is literally vibrating the water. There's not a single sail in sight. To an isolated Japan, this was the first real, undeniable voice from the outside world in over 2 centuries. And it didn't arrive with a polite, friendly knock. It arrived with a terrifying roar of iron. So what actually brought these mechanical monsters to this quiet bay? It was a brilliantly blunt, 2-word directive from the 13th U.S. President, Millard Fillmore. Open Japan. That's it. It sounds simple on paper, right? But executing an order like that against a country that absolutely did not want to be opened would require a leader with an unbending, practically iron will. Section 2. Blood of the Sea. Let's look at the man commanding those terrifying ships. Matthew Calbraith Perry was born in 1794, right into a family of American naval heroes. At just 14 years old, he enlists in the United States Navy. By 18, he's thrown into the absolute meat grinder of the War of 1812 against Britain. And out there, amidst the cannon fire and the crashing waves, a young Perry learns a very harsh reality. Courage alone, that's not going to keep you alive at sea. You need technical skill, incredibly sharp judgment, and absolute, uncompromising discipline. This trial by fire forged a commander his men would later call Old Bruin, a guy with a booming voice who demanded absolute perfection from everyone around him. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it highlights Perry's visionary leap over veteran officers who literally laughed at steam power. Back in the 1830s, the Navy was still totally dependent on sailing ships. The old guard thought putting a heavy, fire-breathing steam engine on a wooden warship was a terrible joke. But Perry didn't. He saw that a steam-powered ship wasn't at the mercy of the wind anymore. It could plow straight through a violent storm. It could maneuver perfectly in shallow coastal waters. He knew this wasn't just some cool new gadget. It was a total revolution that was going to rewrite the rules of naval warfare forever. And Perry was relentless about it. As the commandant of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, he was everywhere. He was micromanaging blueprints, demanding better raw materials, and pushing his engineers to the absolute limit. And all that obsession paid off in 1837 when they completed the USS Fulton. This was the very first full-scale steam-powered warship in U.S. Navy history. Perry himself served as her first captain, which earned him a huge promotion to Commodore and the legendary title Father of the Steam Navy. So now he had the ultimate cutting-edge tool for his greatest mission yet. Section 3. Japan's Closed Door. Okay, if you aren't super familiar with Japanese history, we really need to pause here because it's vital to understand just how intensely locked down Japan actually was. The ruling government, the Tokugawa shogunate, enforced a strict policy called sakoku that translates to national isolation. And they kept this up for over 200 years. Aside from a few tiny, massively restricted trading posts for the Dutch and Chinese, it was a totally closed loop. Nobody came in, nobody left. It was an unbreakable law. The government believed that completely cutting off foreign ideas and influence was the absolute only way to prevent chaos and keep their grip on power. So Japan became a perfectly preserved time capsule, completely untouched by the crazy, rapid industrialization happening in the West. So naturally, you might be wondering, why did the U.S. suddenly decide they needed to kick this 200-year-old door open? Well, it wasn't about spreading democracy. It was mostly just pragmatic economics. The U.S. was rapidly expanding its hugely profitable trade routes to China, and those new steamships, they ate coal like crazy. They desperately needed a pit stop right in the middle of the Pacific to refuel. On top of that, American whaling ships were operating in the dangerous northern Pacific, and they needed a safe harbor to ride out typhoons or fix broken equipment. Geographically, Japan was literally the perfect spot, but politically, they were completely off limits.
Section 4. The Gunboat Diplomat.
So the crucial point is that Perry learned to use the mere threat of overwhelming force to win arguments without ever firing a single shot. He actually mastered this during the Mexican-American War in 1846, commanding massive fleets and coordinating amphibious landings. Historians call this tactic gunboat diplomacy. It's basically the incredibly calculated art of backing up your polite requests with terrifying, heavy intimidation. You make your demands at the negotiating table, while the silent, looming weight of your massive naval artillery sits anchored right outside the window. You don't have to pull the trigger. The cannons do the talking for you. Which brings us right back to that dramatic day in July 1853. 4 monstrous black ships, as the completely stunned locals called them, arrive. Absolute panic sweeps down the Japanese coast. Messengers are literally sprinting through the streets of Edo. When Japanese officials row out and tell the Americans they have to leave immediately, Perry is completely unbothered. He flat out refuses. He demands they accept President Fillmore's letter. And then he issues a terrifying ultimatum. Take the letter, or I will sail this heavily armed fleet directly toward your capital. Now here is the craziest part. He was bluffing. Congress had absolutely not authorized him to fire a single shot unless he was attacked first. But Perry didn't blink. The Japanese government, completely overwhelmed by his unyielding stance, finally accepted the letter. Perry promised he'd be back in a year for their answer, turned his ships around, and sailed away.
Section 5, Opening the Door. But Perry was a smart guy, and he started hearing rumors that Russian diplomats were also sniffing around Japan, trying to lock down their own treaties. He wasn't about to let someone else steal his prize. So, instead of waiting a full year, Perry returns in February 1854, just 6 months later. And he doesn't just bring back the original 4 ships. He rolls up with an expanded fleet of 9 heavily armed warships. He knew perfectly well that doubling his firepower was an argument that required a zero translation.
But here's where it gets brilliant. Harry didn't just bring weapons, he brought the future. This is exactly what we call the honey and the bear strategy. To awe the Japanese officials, he literally set up a functioning quarter-sized steam locomotive right there on the sandy beach. Imagine seeing a machine the size of a grand piano hurtling along metal tracks when you've never even seen a steam engine before. Then, he showed off the electric telegraph, zapping messages instantly over a wire. The officials were absolutely spellbound. Perry was showing them very clearly, fighting American military power is useless, but if you cooperate, look at all this incredible technology you could have. He wasn't just scaring them, he was intellectually winning them over. The actual negotiations were incredibly tense and dragged on for days. But with 9 massive warships parked right offshore, silently pressuring the talks, Perry didn't give up a single inch. Finally, on March 31st, 1854, it happened. The Convention of Kanagawa was signed. The ports of Shimoda and Hakodate were officially opened to American ships. Traditional gifts of sake were brought aboard the U.S. vessels to celebrate, and just like that, the heavy iron door that had kept Japan sealed away for over 200 years finally swung open without a single cannon firing.
Section 6, Echoes of History.
Now, by forcing Japan's hand, Perry unintentionally lit a massive powder keg. The sudden, undeniable realization that Japan was technologically light years behind the West caused an absolute political earthquake domestically. It totally destabilized the country, ultimately leading to the complete collapse of the ruling shogunate. That meant the sudden end of the samurai era as they knew it. But from those ashes came the Meiji Restoration. Japan embarked on an unbelievably rapid, aggressive campaign of modernization, transforming itself from an isolated, feudal, sword-wielding society into a modern, global industrialized superpower in literally just 1 generation. Perry thought he was just opening a port, but he actually pulled the trigger on a massive revolution. And this brilliantly illustrates how 19th century naval aggression connects to our modern grocery stores. Did you know Perry actually brought back Japanese soybean seeds from this very expedition? It's true. Those tiny seeds were planted, and they eventually sparked a massive new agricultural industry in the United States. Today, the U.S. is one of the top producers of soybeans in the entire world. It's just a crazy, quiet footnote to history that a staple of our modern diets followed right in the wake of those intimidating black gunboats. But the echoes of Perry's mission came full circle in an incredibly dramatic way nearly a century later. Fast forward to September 2nd, 1945. World War II is ending. The formal surrender of Japan is taking place on the deck of the American battleship, the USS Missouri. General Douglas MacArthur orchestrates this incredibly cinematic moment. He specifically requests the exact same fragile American flag that Commodore Perry flew on his black ships back in 1853. He had it brought aboard and prominently displayed during the ceremony. It was a profound reminder that history always has a way of returning to where it started. I want to read this quote from our sources because it perfectly captures the magnitude of what happened. No single cannonball changes the world, but a door once opened does not close again. The heavy thunder of steam and iron that Matthew Perry brought into that quiet bay was the tolling of a bell. It loudly announced the definitive end of one age and the explosive, unstoppable beginning of another. And that leaves us with a lot to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. Perry used the absolute cutting-edge tech of his day, steam power, and the sheer, terrifying threat of iron to pry open a society that had completely locked itself away. Looking at our world right now, I want you to ask yourself, what closed doors are out there today? Whether they are political barriers, technological limits, or deep cultural divides. And what incredible new forces, or maybe what audacious visionary leaders is it going to take to finally open them? Thank you so much for exploring this incredible piece of history with me. Keep asking questions and keep seeking to understand the fascinating world around you.